Before we start writing an actual Python client, I'm going to need to install Python here on this Windows machine. So far, we've been doing everything on the Raspberry Pi. So in order to do that, I'm going to download Python 3. We've been using 2 on the Pi. I'm going to use 3 here just to prove that the Python version doesn't matter at all. I'm going to go to the Python site, and this is a 64-bit machine, so I'm going to use the 64-bit MSI installer. It's a lot easier if you use the MSI installer. I highly recommend that on Windows. So I'm going to kick off the installation process here, and you'll see briefly how that works. One thing I'm going to mention as we do this is I'm going to install it on C. You probably don't want to install this in program files because it needs to write config files and such, so you don't want to have to elevate every time you're doing anything. I'm going to select install for all users except the default directory, and then I'm going to install. Now, be forewarned, I am skipping here through parts of this, but the Python installer does take several minutes. It's not kidding when it says that. I probably on this machine spent all told about 8 minutes or so waiting for it. I'm not going to have you wait through all of that, so I am definitely going to be skipping a bit here towards the end of this installation. One thing you should see is that a console window is about to pop up here near the end of installation. You're going to see that it's installing pip and some setup tools that we had to do previously separately on the Linux install. That all comes out of the box with this MSI installer. So this will go away here in a second, and then it will actually finish up with the install. And once the install is finished, there's a screen that pops up. You just click finish, and then that's all there is to it. And with that, we have Python 3 installed and ready to start hitting our REST server. Before starting on development, there is another bit of housekeeping to be done here. I'm bringing up a PowerShell window, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to install something called requests using this tool called Easy Install. This is sort of a nice add-on on the Windows version where I can just go out and get this and look for it. And this is going to install requests, which is a client-side API for doing web requests. And that's actually going to come in really handy to us here as we do our work. So what I'm going to do is navigate through PowerShell to the desktop, and I'm going to make a directory called Home Automation Client, and that's where we're going to do the work here in Python. So now that that's created, I'm going to create a file in there. I'm going to navigate there first in PowerShell, and that's what I'm going to use to execute it. And then I'm going to actually create inside this folder the new Python file that I'm going to use as the client. So I'm just going to call this very non-creatively client.py. And once that's in place, we'll be ready to kind of start with the development and then execute from PowerShell the way we were doing on the Raspberry Pi. So I'm going to open up client, and it's going to be obviously empty, and we'll get started with the development from here. Now it's time to implement the client. For the sake of saving time, I am going to be pasting in some snippets of code here as we go, so just bear that in mind. The first thing I'm going to do is import the modules that I'm going to need, which are going to be sys, JSON, and request. And then I'm also going to define what the actual URL is going to be for the basis of the API, which is going to be Raspberry Pi /lights, as we were doing before. This is going to be used a lot throughout what I'm doing here, so it'll just be handier to have it lying around. Next up, I'm going to define a main that bears in mind the command line arguments being passed in, and I'm going to set it to process these arguments as they come in. And in process, I'm going to look at the arguments. I'm going to look at the first one specifically as the command, and then I'm going to look at subsequent ones as arguments to that command as needed. Not all of them need arguments, some of them do. So I'm going to set about now implementing these methods that are defined but not implemented here. So first up is print lights to the console. This is going to be an auxiliary method used by print all lights, print single light, and what it's going to do is just print the lights. And here in print all lights, we're going to loop through the lights that are returned by the service and invoke the method that we just defined. So next up is print single light. This is going to, similar to what we've done before of the light that's returned, it's going to be a single light, not a collection. So we're going to print that to the console. Next up is add light. Add light is going to take 3 parameters, and it's going to perform the necessary request in order to add a light on the server. Set light state is the method that's going to turn the lights on and off. So it'll take in a command on or off as well as the light ID. And finally, delete light is going to take the light ID and perform the request needed to delete the light. And you see requests is nice. It takes in these arguments that are actually the REST verbs, which is very handy and sort of intuitive to do. So now let's take a look at the implementation in action, which is perhaps the best way to understand what's going on. Here is my PowerShell window, and I'm going to use the Python executable on client.py, and I'm going to say get all, and that's going to return nothing because we haven't put in any lights. So at this point, I'm going to add our Office desk light on A1, and then I'm going to do a get again in order to see that that happens. So get all should show me a light, and there we have it. There's the light with A1. So if you wanted to, you could also do this, and it would return that same light. We're just specifying it this time. So now let's actually look at adding a light, and it's going to be basement A2. We'll demonstrate here that now we can see a collection of lights. So there are both of our lights. Next up, it's time to actually take a look at turning the lights on and off, which is obviously the most interesting part. So I'm going to bring presenter here onto the screen with a feed of my desktop lamp once again, so you can see there that it's off. And I'm going to execute the API, and I'm going to say that I want to set the Office desk light on, and I want to turn it on, and we'll see that it comes on. Hey, there we go. Now let's take a look at turning it off, just to make sure we can do both operations. And there we have it, it turns off. So now what we can do is demonstrate that delete works. So I'm going to do another execute, and I'm going to say delete, and let's delete Office desk. And then to prove that it's deleted, let's go ahead and execute a collection of, or a get all to see the collection. And there you have it, we have successfully deleted the light.